Hi, I'm Keane. I used to think staying quiet made me strong. That if I kept my head down, played nice, maybe they'd finally let me in. But last month at my brother's birthday party, my father shattered a wine glass on my head in front of 100 guests. All because I wouldn't sign over the condo I paid for. That wasn't the worst part. The worst part was realizing this had been planned. Quietly. For years. Behind my back. The inheritance, the fake documents, the lies, the smile he wore when he said it was all for the family. And I'm wondering, how do you fight a legacy that never saw you as part of it? The group message came in just after lunch, buried between a spam email about patio furniture and a shipping notification from a site I didn't remember ordering from. It was from my father's assistant, a woman I'd met twice, but who called me Kevin both times. The PDF attached was a formal invitation to my brother Thaddeus's 38th birthday party. Everything about it screamed perfection. Gold trim, serif fonts, RSVP instructions. But it wasn't the aesthetic that stuck in my chest. At the bottom, in a much smaller font, under the caterer and valet services, there it was. Logistics, volunteer, Keane Hayes. I stared at it for a long moment. No "Dear Keane," no "Hope you can make it," just a label, a role, like I was a damn supply vendor. I deleted the message, but the words didn't disappear with it. Later that afternoon, I found myself walking in circles around my condo. The same loop, from the kitchen to the balcony and back again. I wasn't even trying to process it. I was just trying to keep my hands busy. There's something about silence after a slight that either soothes or stings. This one stung. I thought back to previous gatherings. Every time I was the guy they called to pick up the extra ice, or to refill the water pitchers because you're already standing, right? No matter how old I got, or how many bills I paid alone, I remained the one who made the events run, but never got a seat at the table. One Thanksgiving, I remember holding a garbage bag full of paper plates while Thaddeus stood in the kitchen, explaining to our dad why his third startup needed just one more round of funding. My hands smelled like cranberry sauce and bleach. Thaddeus's plate hadn't been cleared yet. The funny thing is, I never really said anything about it, not once. I thought being quiet was the mature choice. Maybe I mistook silence for grace. That night, I called my mother. I asked her gently, was the volunteer tag a mistake? She paused, then let out a short laugh. Oh, Keane, you know your father. He doesn't mean anything by it. I wanted to ask her how many things he'd done without meaning anything by it. Instead, she launched into a list of what she was planning to wear and asked if I still had those folding chairs in the garage. Could you bring a few, just in case seating runs short? I told her I would. Then I sat in the dark, with my phone on the table, vibrating every so often with useless reminders from apps I never use. I thought about not going. I really did. But then something clicked. Not rage, not spite, something colder. I made an appointment for a haircut, pulled out the only suit I owned that still fit properly, ironed it twice. I chose a tie Thaddeus once called funeral chic, and smiled as I knotted it. If I was going to play the part they gave me, I'd show up looking like the best-dressed volunteer Charlotte had ever seen. On the day of the party, I pulled up to the house, our old family home, now more a showroom for self-importance than a place anyone lived in. The valet glanced at his clipboard. Name? Keane Hayes. He scanned, then paused. Ah, logistics? I nodded, not trusting my voice. Inside, the place was packed. Laughter spilled from every corner. It smelled like expensive cologne and catered shrimp. I didn't see a single person carrying anything heavier than a wine glass. No one offered a greeting. Not even a glance. Near the bar, I spotted Alaric, my father. He caught my eye, gave a short wave like someone acknowledging a waiter dropping off the bill. Glad you made it, he said, lifting his scotch slightly. "Someone needs to keep things running." I held his gaze. I wasn't aware I was staff. He chuckled and clapped me on the shoulder. "That's just Hayes humor. You know that." I smiled tightly and stepped away. My feet carried me toward the side hallway, where the main dining room gave way to the more intimate family rooms. As I rounded the corner, I caught a glimpse of Thaddeus, laughing with our father. Alaric leaned in, pride beaming off him. Now this one carries the Hayes name with pride. I stood still for a moment. They didn't know I was there, or maybe they did and didn't care. I had shown up as family. They saw me as a function. I stood by the kitchen doorway, nursing a club soda and pretending to read the labels on the wine bottles lining the shelves. The house buzzed with conversation, forks clinking on porcelain, the occasional burst of laughter. Every corner of the room carried the scent of money, dry-aged meats, aged wine, and just enough lavender to pretend this was Southern charm and not ego. About 45 minutes had passed since I arrived. I hadn't been greeted by Thaddeus. My mother had waved from across the room like someone spotting a colleague in an airport terminal. Alaric had tossed me a line about keeping things running, and I hadn't seen him since. Then I heard it, his voice rising above the crowd like a minister ready to sermonize. "Everyone," he called, lifting his glass. "Before dessert arrives, a few words." The room hushed instantly. Chairs slid back slightly. Phones were tucked away. Alaric stood with confidence, his posture radiating ownership, not just of the house, but of the moment. I moved toward the back of the room, not out of shame, but for safety. I knew better than to be close when Alaric started talking. He began, predictably, by praising Thaddeus, his vision, his resilience, his commitment to carrying the Hayes legacy forward. Guests nodded along. Some clapped politely. Then he shifted. "You see," he continued, "a family only thrives when every part of it pulls in the same direction. And sometimes that requires sacrifice." I felt it before he even turned. Alaric set his glass down, stepped away from the table, and approached me. His arm found my shoulder with the casual force of ownership, his tone syrup-sweet for the guests but lined with steel. "Son," he said, louder now, "it's time to hand over that condo to someone who's building something real for this family. You know those moments where everyone seems to freeze but your heartbeat doesn't?" That was this. The room didn't gasp. No one dropped a fork. But I felt the change, the stiffened spines, the sideways glances, the polite sips to cover discomfort. I looked at my brother. He smirked. I turned to my mother. She looked at her lap. Silence ballooned until Thaddeus, of course, broke it. He chuckled, loud enough to cut through the tension. "It's just a condo, Keane. Can't believe this is even a debate." He leaned back in his chair. "Or maybe you're not done playing lone wolf?" His words didn't sting. They carved. I had no comeback. My hand gripped the back of the chair nearest to me, knuckles pale. It wasn't rage that filled me. It was recognition. This wasn't about property. It never had been. I cleared my throat. "So," I began softly, "the condo I paid for, that I live in, is now a family heirloom?" Alaric grinned the way a CEO grins before announcing layoffs. "You've never built anything beyond yourself, Keane. That's not how legacies work." I didn't speak again. I nodded once, turned to the crowd and muttered, "Thank you all for a lovely evening," though I couldn't tell you who I was addressing. I walked towards the hallway restroom, each step heavier than the last. Inside, I locked the door and leaned over the sink. The lights were too bright. The air smelled like pine-scented cleaner. I ran cold water and cupped it over my face, letting it drip down without wiping it away. Through the wall, voices carried. Alaric. He'll come around. He always does. Thaddeus. We need him to sign by Monday. The new leaseholders are waiting. It wasn't a request. It was a formality, a decision already made, without me. I looked up at the mirror. My reflection looked like someone else, older, wearier, but sharper around the edges. Not again, I whispered. Not like this. I stayed a few more seconds, breathing evenly, letting the water on my face cool my anger to something more useful. As I stepped back into the dining area, the crowd had shifted. Alaric was mid-laugh, raising his glass again, and his eyes met mine across the room. He didn't blink. Neither did I. I stepped out of the hallway bathroom, face dry, breath even, jaw clenched just enough to feel it. The dining room was quieter now. The buzz had settled into smaller conversations. Guests lingered near the bar and out in the garden where the jazz quartet filled the air with soft, forgettable melodies. From a distance, everything looked perfectly normal, like nothing had cracked. I walked toward the center of the room, not because I had something to say, but because I couldn't stomach leaving without doing it on my terms. I was halfway to the front door when I heard his voice again. Running off again, huh? The sound cut through the room like broken glass. Alaric was standing by the fireplace now, drink in hand, smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes. You never could face things, Keane, always slipping out the side when it got real. I turned slowly. My feet moved before my brain even formed the words. But I didn't speak. I mean, hell, he continued. You show up late, sulk in the corner, and now you're storming out before dessert? What is it you contribute here, son? Someone near the kitchen coughed. You think I'm being hard on him? Alaric turned to the crowd, eyes sweeping the room like a game show host. I raised 2 boys, one's building things, the other's still hiding in his own head. He pointed at me with the hand not holding his glass. Selfish, ungrateful, always playing victim, like the world owes you something just for showing up. I took 1 step closer. Thaddeus didn't move. Neither did my mother. Everyone watched with the kind of polite stillness reserved for car wrecks or onstage meltdowns. Alaric stepped forward, closing the space between us. His index finger jabbed at my chest, once, twice. You don't get to disappear for years and act like this house still owes you anything. He raised his voice again. That condo was supposed to be part of the legacy, but I guess that doesn't mean much to you. I didn't react. Not then. I just stared at him. He saw the silence as weakness. And then it happened. He dropped the glass. The sound startled someone, maybe even him, but his hand was already moving before logic caught up. His fist landed against the side of my head with a force I didn't expect. It wasn't just pain. It was bright, white static. I staggered to the left, hand catching the edge of a side table. The room went dead quiet. No one gasped, no one screamed, but someone dropped a wine glass near the entry. The clink rang louder than it should have. I brought my fingers to my temple. They came back wet. My vision didn't blur, but it shifted, like looking through a windshield in a storm. Blood slid down the side of my face, slow and deliberate. It crept along my collar, a thick, dark trail on white fabric. I straightened up, shoulders back, spine stiff. No one moved. Thaddeus watched. Blank. My mother pressed her lips together, but her hands stayed at her sides. A waiter approached with a napkin, stopped mid-step, and retreated without a word. I turned in a slow circle, meeting eyes that quickly turned away. One woman glanced at her husband, as if to silently ask, "Do we leave now?" Still no one spoke. I reached for my coat, threw it over my shoulder, and walked toward the exit. No stomping, no speeches, just the sound of my own footsteps on polished wood. At the front door, a child's voice pulled me back. "Did you really get kicked out?" I turned. It was Owen, my cousin's son. He looked up at me with that terrible, honest curiosity only kids have. I crouched, blood still damp on my shirt, and smiled. Not out of kindness, but out of resolve. "No, kid," I said, wiping a streak from my jaw. I walked out. I patted his shoulder and stood, then stepped outside into the night. The air was cool against the side of my face, a small mercy. Crickets chirped from somewhere beyond the hedges. The sounds of laughter from the garden barely reached me anymore. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my phone. It rang once, twice. Then I heard his voice, rough, alert. "Elias." I stared into the dark, the blood starting to dry under my collar. "It's Keane. I think it's time." I didn't go home right away. I drove in circles for a while, past gas stations, shuttered storefronts, and rows of houses with porch lights still on. I must have passed my own street 3 times before finally turning in. There was something in me resisting the idea of walking into silence with blood on my collar. But eventually, the wheel turned home. The hallway light flickered once when I stepped in. I left it on. I didn't bother locking the door behind me. It was close to midnight, but I didn't check the clock. I didn't need to. In the mirror by the front closet, I saw him. Me, but not really. Dried blood formed a jagged line from temple to collarbone. The swelling was more pronounced now, purpling under the eye like a badge I never asked for. I didn't reach for the first aid kit. I didn't change my shirt. I just stared. There's something quiet about shock that people don't talk about. It isn't loud. It isn't messy. It's the kind that holds its breath in a mirror while your body catches up with what happened. Eventually, I moved to the bathroom. The water took too long to get warm. When it did, I stepped in, letting the stream hit the back of my neck first, then my shoulders, then my face. I kept my eyes closed, breathing through my mouth, letting everything replay. Not the punch, not at first. The looks, the stillness, the ones who couldn't meet my eyes, the ones who looked entertained. Every detail was burned into my mind. The woman in the red dress who leaned into her husband's ear, the bartender who froze mid-pour, my mother, still as a statue, looking at her wine glass like it was about to offer her a way out. It wasn't just the punch, it was what happened after. Or didn't happen. Back in the bedroom, I towel-dried my hair and sat on the edge of the bed. My phone buzzed twice, vibrating against the wood of the nightstand. I ignored the first. The second came with a name I hadn't seen in a long time. Lena. I stared at it a few seconds before opening it. The message was short, direct. "I don't know what they told you growing up, but you never deserved to be anyone's punching bag." My chest tightened, not from pain, but recognition. Lena had always seen things clearly, even when I didn't. Years ago, at a family BBQ, Thaddeus had made some crack about how I'd never learned how to show up. I don't remember what I was doing, probably slicing fruit or setting chairs. But I remember Lena standing up in front of everyone, looking Thaddeus in the eye and saying, "Maybe you confuse showing off with showing up." That moment passed like most do. It faded into the hundreds of other slights. But now, reading her message, it hit like something unearthed. I walked to my closet, pulled down the old leather briefcase from the top shelf. It still smelled like the time I used it for my first job interview, worn but intact. Inside were the condo papers, receipts, deed records, all the things I'd kept to prove I owned something. Maybe I always knew I'd have to defend it. I stared at them, spread across the bed like puzzle pieces. "I've been playing dead for years to avoid their judgment," I whispered. Tonight, they buried the wrong man. I picked up my phone, thumb hovering over the contact labeled Elias. I didn't call. Not yet. I opened a text. I'm ready to move forward. I sat with that sentence for a while before hitting send. The apartment was quiet. Outside, a dog barked down the street. A siren howled in the distance. I leaned back against the headboard, pulled the comforter over my lap, and stared at the ceiling. Before I turned off the lamp, I opened Lena's message one more time. I typed back one line. Thanks. I needed to hear that. Then I added another message. This one to Elias. Can we meet tomorrow morning? Downtown Charlotte never looked this surgical. Maybe it was the rain. Or maybe I was just seeing it differently now, through the windshield of Elias's Buick, waiting for the courthouse to finish their lunch recess. But I wasn't here to admire glass buildings or urban charm. I was here because a line had been crossed. Twice, once with a fist, the other on paper. Elias's office was nestled in a row of old bank buildings, tucked just enough between city renovations that the front door still creaked when you opened it. He didn't bother with a receptionist. He didn't need one. You didn't walk into Elias's office unless you were serious. He poured 2 mugs of black coffee, no sugar, no nonsense, and gestured for me to sit across from his cluttered desk, where decades of files were stacked with military precision. Let's see it, he said simply. I slid the manila folder across the table, watching his eyebrows knit slightly as he scanned the pages. He flipped quickly at first. Title page, notarization, signature blocks. But then his fingers slowed at a small detail near the bottom. He tapped it twice and leaned in. This date, he said, turning the page toward me. You supposedly signed this on the 15th of last month. I nodded. I was in Seattle that week for a work conference. You sure? I have the boarding pass saved in my inbox, and the Uber receipt. He raised his eyebrows, not impressed, just satisfied. That's not sloppy, he muttered. That's bold. He flipped another page, then paused. His mouth twitched. Not a smile, more like the hint of one trying to surface but caught in mid-thought. Well, he said, this might be a miracle or just plain stupidity. He turned the document back to face me and pointed at the address line. 58806 Main Street. Not 5826. 1 digit off. The condo I'd purchased 5 years ago, sweated and starved to own, was at 5826. That's not a typo, I said slowly. That's a different property. Elias nodded. And a legal gold mine. He stood and moved to a file cabinet, pulling a thin folder labeled Alaric Holdings, LLC. He slid it across the desk. You're going to love this part. Inside were 3 filings from city records, each referencing a proposed corporate lease on 5806, not 5826, all within the past 6 weeks. So they're trying to rent it out? I asked. He nodded. Which means they needed you gone, or at least legally removed as the owner, and someone got greedy enough to fudge the paperwork. I stared at the folder. Elias leaned back, fingers steepled. They never expected you to read the fine print, Keane. But you did. It wasn't anger I felt. It was clarity. Like a window that had been fogged for years was suddenly clean. I could see the whole room now, and I was done pretending it didn't stink. What's the next step? I asked. We file an injunction to halt all activity on that address, and we start prepping a motion to invalidate the deed transfer. You'll be back on title in less than 60 days. I nodded. Do it. He slid the documents toward me. I signed each line with steady hands. No hesitation. No tremor. You're not just reclaiming a condo, Elias said, his tone lighter now. You're reclaiming your story. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky was still gray, but there was light bleeding through the clouds. I stepped onto the sidewalk and pulled out my phone. Just as I was about to message Lena a thank you, a new notification popped up. No name, just a number. Let's not make this uglier than it needs to be. Call me. Alaric. I didn't respond. I looked up at the skyline of my city, not as a victim, but as a man with a paper trail that didn't just point backward. It pointed forward. We left Elias's office just after lunch, the kind of humid southern heat that makes your shirt stick to your back even in shade. I'd asked if he had time to dig a little deeper today. He said, "If we're already cracking the coffin, might as well make sure the body's in there." The county records department was 2 blocks over, tucked between a modern cafe and a crumbling courthouse annex. The inside still smelled like microfilm and lemon cleaner. Elias introduced himself with the same confidence he used in court, and within minutes we were sitting across from a clerk who looked like she hadn't been impressed by anything since 1993. "We're looking for transfer documents on 317 Fairhaven Drive," Elias said. "Charlotte, 28207, full deed history." She nodded, pushed her glasses up, and disappeared into the back archives. 15 minutes later, she returned with a thick manila folder that looked untouched by daylight. "This the address?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," I replied. She slid it forward, and we began flipping. That was the most recent official deed. Signed, notarized, and sealed by Walter Hayes, my grandfather. It had never been updated, never transferred to Alaric. It still sat in trust. Elias skimmed, his lips moving silently. Then he stopped. "This," he said, tapping the trust clause with his pen, "says the property is to be transferred to you upon your 35th birthday." I blinked. "That's in 6 months." He looked at me. "Keane, this house has never been your father's, legally or otherwise. You've been trespassing in your own legacy." I didn't respond. Couldn't. I sat with that sentence like it had weight, because it did. We returned to his office where he began scanning copies and drafting motions. While he worked, I texted Gabriel. I hadn't seen him since we both worked at First Metro Bank in our 20s. Now he ran asset compliance for one of the mid-tier institutions in Charlotte. If Alaric had leveraged anything illegally, Gabriel would know. The call came 30 minutes later. "Keane?" "Yeah." "You're not going to believe this," he said. "Alaric filed a private equity line using a deed under Hayes Capital LLC. That's not a family trust. That's a shell. And the collateral? 5806 Main, listed under false ownership. There's also a lease pending with Carter Urban Holdings. They think they're moving in next month." I closed my eyes. "They were selling off my future," I said, while smiling through birthday cake. "Want me to forward the filings?" "Send everything." By the time Elias printed the last page, my phone had 3 PDFs and a voicemail from Gabriel that started with, "This is bigger than you think." Elias laid out the game plan. "We file for injunctive relief first thing tomorrow, freeze activity on both addresses. Then we serve a motion to void any leases tied to Hayes Capital LLC based on fraudulent transfer." He slid the paperwork to my side of the desk. My name sat at the bottom, waiting. "You're not just reclaiming property, Keane," he said. "You're reclaiming agency." I signed. It was the first time in months, maybe years, my hand didn't shake. As I left, I carried the briefcase tighter than before. It didn't feel like a bag anymore. It felt like armor. Back at my condo, I spread the trust documents across the dining table. My eyes lingered on my grandfather's signature. Walter Hayes. He had died quietly, slipping away before I really understood his silence. For years, I thought he'd left nothing behind but cold dinners and stricter rules. But in writing, he left me everything. He saw something no one else did. He just never said it out loud. I sat back, trying to imagine what Alaric would say when he found out. How Thaddeus would spin it. How Iris would fake confusion and feigned heartbreak. A notification blinked on my laptop. Subject: Immediate legal concern. Sender: Richmond and Moore, LLP body. Cease all interference. Your father is entitled to peaceful possession of the estate. Any further intrusion may result in legal consequences. I stared at the message, then slowly closed the lid of the laptop. That house is mine, I whispered. Let them try and stop me. The front door wasn't locked. That felt symbolic. I didn't knock. I stepped inside with Elias behind me, his briefcase in one hand and his phone already recording in the other. I could smell rosemary chicken and something sweet baking, like it was just another Thursday. The same house where I'd scrubbed floors, carried centerpieces, and watched from the sidelines while my last name was worn like a crown by people who never earned it. They were already at the dining table. Alaric at the head, leaning back in his chair with his fingers steepled like a judge. My mother sat beside him, eyes tired, dressed too carefully for a private conversation. Thaddeus was scrolling his phone, pretending he hadn't heard us walk in. No one stood. I didn't speak right away. I walked to the table, pulled the chair nearest me a few inches back. Not to sit, but to place the leather folder down flat. I opened it slowly, deliberately, and spread 3 documents side by side. Let's begin, I said. The silence broke like a sheet of thin ice. Elias cleared his throat. Per the trust deed executed by Walter Hayes in 1987, legal ownership of 317 Fairhaven Drive has never been transferred to Mr. Alaric Hayes. Therefore, the property is still held in trust, and Alaric raised one hand, palm up, like he was blessing us. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, counselor. He turned to me. Son, Keane, you've made your point, but we're family. We don't air our scabs in courtrooms. I didn't flinch. You filed fraudulent leases, used my name and address to secure loans, and tried to write me out of a home that was always meant to be mine. Alaric gave a half smile. And yet, here you are, speaking calmly, which means you're open to options. He slid a printed document across the table. Elias didn't reach for it, so I did. It was an amendment to Alaric's will. One paragraph stood out in bold. In light of recent tensions, I hereby acknowledge Keane Hayes as the future heir of the Fairhaven residence, conditional upon cessation of all legal proceedings henceforth. He looked at me like he'd just offered peace. I tore it in half, then in half again. You never had the power to give me what was already mine. Nobody moved. Even Thaddeus stopped pretending to scroll. Alaric's jaw clenched. Elias leaned forward. As of this morning, Judge Rydell has reviewed our motion. You have 14 days to vacate the property. All tenants, including informal or assumed parties, must relocate by the specified deadline. Alaric stood slowly. You think you've won something? No, I replied. I think I've stopped losing. He stepped toward me, not rushing, but heavy with heat under his collar. You think tearing apart your family will bring you peace? This isn't revenge, I said. This is repair. I turned to leave. Elias packed the remaining documents, his tone calm but final. If we don't receive compliance confirmation by end of business Monday, formal eviction begins Tuesday morning. We moved toward the hallway. I didn't expect anyone to follow. But just as I reached for the door, I felt a hand on my arm. My mother. She didn't look angry. She didn't look relieved. Just small. Smaller than I'd ever seen her. You don't have to do this, she said, barely above a whisper. I didn't look at her when I answered. Yes, I do. I woke up to a riot in my pocket, phone buzzing like a wasp under glass, notifications stacked into the hundreds. At first, I thought someone had died. But no, someone had recorded it. The video clip was 37 seconds long, grainy but undeniable. It showed Alaric Hayes, former vice president of Hayes Capital, punching his son across the face in the middle of a birthday toast. The audio was sharp. Gasps, the sound of a glass breaking, someone shouting, "Oh my God!" The title burned across the screen. Father punches son at family party over property dispute. Regional news had picked it up. The comments? Brutal. Typical old money trash. Entitled patriarchs crumble when their control slips. Where's the arrest? Hashtags piled up. Hayes scandal. Condo gate. Inheritance violence. I blinked at the screen, thumb hovering. I didn't repost. I didn't comment. I just watched it once more, slower. My jaw was still swollen. I'd iced it before bed, but the bruise had bloomed in full color overnight. I looked like I'd lost a bar fight, and somehow, in a way, I hadn't. Thaddeus called first. "Keane, listen, I know that video looks bad." "Looks?" I asked. He exhaled. "It's bad optics, okay? For the family, for the company. You could help all of us if you asked them to pull it." I was still staring at my phone screen. My face paused mid-impact. "You mean help the people who watched it happen and did nothing? That's not fair." "You're right. Fair would have been someone stepping in before Dad threw a punch. Or maybe after. Maybe asking if I was all right." He didn't respond. "Take care of your own optics, Thad." And I hung up. Around noon, a Zoom invite popped up. Alaric requesting a private family meeting. The kind of thing where private meant, don't make it worse by involving lawyers. I clicked in out of curiosity, not civility. The grid filled slowly. Alaric's square first, stern, professionally lit. Then my mother, her camera tilted just above her eyes. Thaddeus, who looked like he hadn't slept. Two cousins appeared, Jacob and Hannah, both quiet. "Keane," Alaric greeted me with a politician's smile. "Glad you made time. We can clear the air now, man to man." My silence held the room like a match above dry brush. He cleared his throat. "There's been distortion, exaggeration. You know how the internet works." I screen-shared the scanned trust deed. My cursor circled the name. Walter Hayes. The date. The clause outlining the inheritance. My mother looked away. Thaddeus squinted at his screen like he hadn't seen the paperwork before. Maybe he hadn't. Maybe it didn't matter. "I'm not here to distort," I said. "Just to clarify." Then a message pinged. From Jacob. Jacob H. "You deserve to know. Check your email now." I opened another tab, heart hitching. Attached were PDFs, bank memos, wire transfers, a scanned document with my condo address, linked to a credit line drawn under Thaddeus's name. I paused the Zoom feed. "This," I said, sharing my screen again, "is a breach of law and trust." My mother's video flickered. Then it disconnected entirely. Alaric's jaw tightened. "You're doing this out of spite." "No," I replied. "I'm doing it because someone has to restore the truth." Thaddeus leaned forward. "Keane, be reasonable. You didn't just break the law, you broke the bloodline." I ended the call. The silence in my apartment felt louder than the confrontation. I stared at the dark screen for a beat, then turned back to my inbox. One new message, subject line. Interview request. It read simply, "Mr. Hayes, would you be open to an interview about your family's story?" The sun hadn't fully risen when we pulled up to the curb. The air had a sharpness to it, the kind that usually only visits Charlotte in early spring. Quiet, unsettled, almost rehearsing grief. Elias stepped out first, briefcase in hand, followed by a deputy marshal in full uniform. I followed last, pausing at the sidewalk for just a second before crossing the lawn. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe it was the weight of what was about to happen. Alaric was already waiting at the front door. He wasn't dressed for battle, just a pressed shirt, no tie, jaw locked, no greeting, no protest. He knew. Thaddeus was gone. No car in the driveway, no sign of movement upstairs. Movers began arriving in 2 vans, quiet and efficient. They slipped past us like stagehands at a play's closing act. Inside, they began boxing family photos, heirlooms, whatever wasn't nailed down. From across the street, a news van idled. I saw a reporter lift her camera, lower it again. She wouldn't need the footage. The story had already written itself. No one asked me to stop it. Alaric emerged a half-hour later holding a single suitcase. His expression was unreadable. Not rage, not shame, just hollow. My mother followed behind him, shoulders hunched, sunglasses on despite the clouds. She didn't look at me. She just walked. As they passed the gate, a boy on a bike paused nearby, whispering to his friend, "That's their house?" I didn't answer. I just signed the final form on the clipboard handed to me. The deputy witnessed. Elias nodded once, then stepped aside to make a call. "The judge left it to you," Elias said afterward. "One signature from you would have paused all of this." I folded the signed document carefully. "Letting them stay would have meant they still had power," I said. "This isn't about shelter, it's about truth." He didn't press further. That night, the interview aired. They played the footage, Alaric's hand mid-swing, my body recoiling. But they didn't stop there. They played the Zoom call, the trust documents, the lease under Thaddeus's name, the message from Jacob. I'd said, I wasn't angry. I was tired of disappearing. Then, this house was never theirs, and neither was my silence. I didn't watch the whole thing, just enough to know it was real. The next day I returned to Fairhaven Drive. The house was quiet, empty. The movers had taken everything they'd been allowed to. The rest was mine to deal with. I sat on the front steps, not to reflect, not to mourn, just to breathe. A deliveryman approached around noon with a certified envelope. No words exchanged. I signed, took it, opened it on the porch. A letter from Richmond and Moore, LLP. Effective immediately. All claims by Mr. Alaric Hayes regarding tenancy or possession are hereby withdrawn. No further contestation is planned. I reread it twice, then folded it back neatly. My hand didn't shake. I stood, ready to re-enter the house, but I heard it before I turned. A car door closing. I glanced over my shoulder. It was my aunt, my mother's sister. I hadn't seen her since the funeral 5 years ago. She stood at the gate, not moving closer, but not turning away either. "I watched them bury your name for years," she said. "I'm sorry I never said a word." 2 weeks after they left, I returned with a clipboard and a contractor named Daryl, who smelled like sawdust and coffee. The place had been gutted, physically and emotionally. Gone were the velvet curtains and framed oil portraits. The rooms echoed. Floorboards creaked with every step like they were whispering the secrets they'd held in for decades. I didn't flinch anymore when they spoke. "This could be a beautiful lobby," I said, gesturing to the front room. "Reading nook here, open space for dialogue groups, small kitchen in the back." Daryl nodded. "We'll need to level the floor here and redo the electrical, but it's doable." It wasn't just about turning a house into something functional. It was about cleansing the rot, scraping it out layer by layer, just like they'd tried to scrape me out of the family line. Word had spread. A local pastor showed up on day 3 with 5 volunteers from his congregation. They brought paint, prayer, and cornbread. Gabriel returned with a dozen teenagers from his financial literacy program, kids in hoodies and sneakers, rolling paint like pros. They didn't ask questions, just worked. Even 2 guys I hadn't seen since high school showed up with tool belts. "You're doing something that matters," one of them said. "We figured it was time to pitch in." None of them needed to know the full story. They saw what I was building now, and that was enough. I didn't expect to end up in the attic. I hadn't planned to keep anything. But while shifting boxes, I found one labeled Keane in my grandfather's handwriting. Inside were newspaper clippings, old financial journals, and a sealed envelope with my name. My chest tightened. I sat down on the dusty floor and opened it. Keane. If you're reading this, I'm probably gone. That's how these things work. But I want you to know, I saw you. Not just the boy in the background, not just the quiet one. I saw the one who paid attention. You won't win this family with volume. They mistake noise for virtue. But you carry something better. I put the house in trust because I knew Alaric would try to own what wasn't his. That's why I built this for you. For when you were ready. For when it mattered. This house was built for building others. If you're reading this, it's time. W.H. I held the letter in both hands like it might vanish if I blinked too hard. He had known. Not just suspected. He had planned for the storm and left me the umbrella. The next morning, Elias helped me file for non-profit status. We called it the Hayes Trust for Second Chances. Mentorship programs, financial literacy, conflict resolution. Real skills for people who'd been ignored like I had. A local reporter returned, her camera aimed at the front porch where folding chairs and toolboxes sat scattered. I stood beside the plaque we'd just mounted near the door. This story isn't about me, I told her. It's about what happens when silence breaks and something better is built. She asked for a photo. I declined. As the sun dropped, I locked the doors for the night. The house smelled like paint, lemon oil, and fresh beginnings. Just as I was reaching for the light switch, there was a knock. I opened the door. Lena stood there, holding a small potted plant in both hands. I know you said it wasn't about you, she said, but I think you've finally become the man your grandfather saw. I hadn't planned to be at the center that late. The new light fixtures in the hallway had shorted, just a loose wire, but I wanted to fix it myself. It felt like a small act of ownership, like patching up wounds with your own thread. I finished just as the sun dipped below the pines. The spring air had that quiet softness before the first real humidity hits. I stepped onto the porch, rolling my shoulders. She was already there. Aunt Merrill sat on the garden bench beneath the Japanese maple, her hands folded over a worn leather handbag. She didn't look up right away. She just stared at the brick path like it held answers. For a second, I thought maybe she was just passing by. But then she looked up and smiled. "Thought I'd come by before the big reopening," she said, as if this was some casual drop-in. I nodded. "Long way to drive." "I was in town for a dentist appointment." A silence hung between us. I didn't move closer. "You've done a lot with it," she said, eyes on the building. "It looks not new, but clean, lighter." "That's the goal," I replied. She hesitated, then stood, brushing invisible crumbs off her skirt. "I was afraid you wouldn't talk to me." "I'm still not sure I will." She flinched. It wasn't cruel, just honest. Merrill sat again. The hush returned. "I should have spoken up," she said finally. "All those years, I watched your father shrink you, watched Thaddeus do it with a smile, and I stayed quiet." I looked down at my hands. "I thought maybe it wasn't my place," she continued. "But that's just an excuse. The truth? I was scared. Speaking up meant getting cut off. From money, from birthdays, from holidays." I didn't interrupt. "You were always so quiet," she added, voice soft. "We assumed you didn't mind." "I minded," I said. She nodded. "I know." I exhaled slowly. The weight of her words didn't sting. They just settled. "You don't get to rewrite the part where you watched," I said. "But you also don't have to stay a villain." She blinked fast. "I'm not here to make it right. I just wanted you to know I carry it." I walked over to the steps and sat down. She joined me. For a while, we didn't speak. Then she helped me unbox the final item for the reopening. A brass plaque that read, "Built to Heal." We mounted it beside the front entrance, the drill humming into wood like a quiet heartbeat. Meryl stepped back to admire it. "You know," she said, "I always wondered what your grandfather saw in you." "So did I replied. Until I stopped wondering and started doing. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. It was old, edges curled. "This isn't money," she said. "Just something your grandfather gave me a few months before he passed. Said it was for you when the time was right." She handed it to me and stepped away. I didn't open it. I just nodded and watched as she walked into the dusk, her silhouette folding into the shadows like someone quietly exiting a stage they never truly belonged to. The morning air held a hush, like even the wind was pausing to witness what the day would become. I stood in front of the house. No, not a house anymore. The Hayes Center for Restoration and Justice. The name had taken root, just like the ivy climbing the red brick walls we decided not to power wash off. Some things deserved to stay as reminders, not stains, but scars that closed. Inside, volunteers moved quietly, smoothing out tablecloths, adjusting chair placements. Lena adjusted the coffee cart's layout. Elias double-checked the program list, though I knew he'd memorized it days ago. I had a speech printed and folded in my coat pocket. I didn't plan to read it. Some words weren't meant for microphones. By 10, they started arriving. Neighbors, local teachers, social workers, curious teens, church volunteers. Some with folded arms, others with open hands. But they came. That was enough. Gabriel brought his whole youth group, all wearing matching navy shirts. Aunt Meryl stood near the back. She didn't wave. She didn't need to. I didn't see Alaric, but I saw his name. Folded newspaper clippings made their way from one set of hands to another. His business had filed for Chapter 11. The same empire he'd weaponized against me now crumbled under its own lies. I didn't feel triumphant, just still. The ceremony began without fanfare, no spotlight, no anthem, just a soft piano track from the community room and the shuffle of folding chairs. Then came the moment that made it real. A young girl from a foster care outreach stood beside a Korean War veteran from across the street. Together, they cut the ribbon with a pair of golden scissors borrowed from the mayor's office. The crowd clapped, not loud, but long. Someone handed me the mic. I took it. Then I set it on the table beside me. Instead, I pointed to the new bronze plaque by the door. People walked toward it, some squinting, some gasping. "This home no longer belongs to legacy by blood," the plaque read, "but legacy by choice." Beneath that, in engraved italics, "You protect what you build, and what you protect defines you." W.H. No more speeches were needed. After the ceremony, while folks toured the center, I slipped into my office and opened the envelope Aunt Meryl had handed me that night. Inside was an old photo. Me and my grandfather in the backyard. I must have been 7. I was planting something. He was watching, arms crossed, that small smile he wore when he saw something done right. On the back of the photo, in his script, he sees the cracks, and he plants anyway. That's the one who'll rebuild. I framed it and hung it in the mentorship wing. No caption, just presence. Outside, the world moved on. Volunteers stacked folding chairs. Laughter echoed from the new mural wall. I stepped out onto the balcony. From above, the center looked like it had always been this way. Clean lines, open windows, no ghosts. Lena stood by the mural, laughing as a kid asked her how she knew me. Elias sat beneath the maple tree reading "To Kill a Mockingbird" aloud to a group of teens. I leaned on the railing and whispered, more to myself than to anyone else. This house gave them everything and took everything. Now it gives back. And I don't owe it revenge. I gave it purpose. There's something no one tells you about silence. It doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it's a holding place for pain, a waiting room for justice. For most of my life, I let others write the story of who I was. I thought if I stayed quiet long enough, maybe I'd finally be accepted. But silence doesn't heal what's hidden. It only feeds it. What happened in that house wasn't just about inheritance. It was about worth. About the difference between being seen and being used. About choosing to step out of the shadows, not for revenge, but for restoration. If there's one thing I'd tell anyone watching this, it's this. You don't have to keep carrying what broke you. You can build from it. You can define your legacy, not by what you were given, but by what you give others. Family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the people who show up when no one else will. And maybe you've been quiet too long. Maybe you've been waiting for a sign. Let this be it. So, let me ask you, have you ever had to walk away from the very people who told you love was conditional? What did you do when they made you feel invisible? Tell me in the comments. If this story touched you, drop A or type I see you below, or let me know where you're watching from. I'd love to hear your story too. And hey, if you believe in healing, justice, and second chances, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss the next story. There's more truth to share. And maybe, just maybe, it'll be the one someone else needed to hear today.